Good evening, I'm John. I'm the event director at Literati Bookstore. We're pleased to welcome Jehad al-Saftawi in support of My Gaza, a City in Photographs. I'll go over webinars. You heard me as you joined us, but I'll go over one more time how these work. The chat is closed, but you may want to keep the chat window open as I will be dropping links to purchase My Gaza from Literati Bookstore. And if you're watching us later on YouTube, there is always a link to purchase in the description below. You can submit questions for a Q&A, and I'll thread those questions in throughout. So feel free to submit questions at any time using the Q&A feature that's available to you at the bottom of your screen, or I think if you're on a Mac, probably at the top of your screen. And then as a reminder, you can shop for more books at literatibookstore.com. Thousands of titles are available for curbside pickup if you live in the Southeast Michigan area. And in lieu of a book purchase, we'd also ask that you consider a $5 donation to sustain our virtual programming. Whether you'd like to think of it as this week's or this month's or this year's subscription to our programming, you can make donations at literatibookstore.com/donation. Otherwise, we simply thank you for your attendance this evening or this morning or this afternoon, depending on where and when in the world you might be joining us from. So without further ado, I'll introduce our guest this evening. Jehad Saftawi is a documentary journalist, photographer, videographer with work featured on Reuters, BuzzFeed, AJ Plus, Mike, Al Jazeera America, The Huffington Post, and others. Currently, he's seeking asylum from Gaza and arrived in the United States in 2016. He is internationally recognized for setting up one of few live streams during the 2014 Israeli offensive on Gaza and dedicated to social justice and human rights storytelling. Jehad, thank you for joining us this evening on At Home with Literati.
Thank you, John, for having me. It's such a wonderful opportunity.
And thanks and congratulations on this really beautiful book. I know it's very strange to be putting out something like this during a global pandemic and not really able to putting a book together is often a very private process, and sort of you're kind of maybe with some other people, but you're mostly on your own. And then a book tour is a chance to share it with people and to celebrate it with other people. And I know it's not possible right now, but we're grateful to be able to share it with our communities here in Michigan. And I hope that you're finding some ways to celebrate this really, really momentous and important book while staying safe in California.
I do, actually. Thank you.
Great. Well, I think maybe what we can do to start is I'll just share my screen and I can show some of the opening images of the book after I sort of ask you my opening question here, which is basically that just for those who are unfamiliar with the book, this is really one of the first books of its kind. It's a photographic document of Gaza by a journalist from Gaza, a photojournalist from Gaza. And so can you, for our viewers, explain how this book came about? One thing I'm curious about, and not mentioned in your introduction, is how you got into photography as a young person and how you became a photojournalist. So I'm interested in, before the story of this book, the story of you coming to this medium and then coming to use it in this really powerful humanitarian way. And as you do so, I'll share some of the images of the book with our viewers.
Definitely. So I've always liked taking photography, like taking photographs of just surroundings, things that I see like certain beauty in, and I just like to frame. I started my first years of taking photographs. It was with my phone in my neighborhood or in the surrounding neighborhoods with some of my friends, or where when there is an event that taking place, I go. And if, for example, like one of the norms to live in Gaza, there was always airstrikes and there's always something that's happening, and people, like, part of what people react to such events is just go and have a look for themselves. So I was always that kind of person that I always wanted to go and see for myself. I started taking my first photos with my phone, um, like before 2008 Israeli operation on Gaza. It was the so-called Castled, um, really where I just wanted to document those scenes for myself when I went with my cousin to check in his family home where they live in a Tuam neighborhood. On our way, there was a lot of just scenes of destruction where just without me thinking about it, I was just taking photos to show them when I go back to my family. Um, that's how pretty much I started taking photographs, and I really it just captivated me. I always wanted to do more of this. I see there's a lot of things that I could frame it, and maybe this is what was my way of dealing with the reality that's around, is just to frame those realities and contain them, and maybe later think about it. I wasn't actually aware of the process, but this is how I started. Um, the book that we have today, like the main theme of the book is my story and how I witnessed to live in Gaza. I never imagined that I will publish all these photographs in a book and I'll be able to tell my own story with those photographs. But I always wanted to leave Gaza, and I always believed that could have a, I could be somewhere, have a better opportunity and better reality where I could share or contribute with the experiences and the life that I'm coming from. And this is how we are here today, like with the book that I have, trying to uh, give glimpses of life, what it's like for me to grow up in Gaza and to witness all those cycles of violence and inhumane conditions that all the parties are participating in continuing and keeping till today, and try to open prospects for better reality for everyone in Gaza.
Thank you. Um, I'm going to get my questions back. Sorry about that. Um, and as much as it's your story, as you mentioned, it's also the story, of you're a citizen. You were a citizen in Gaza. It is a very story of the citizens, and you mentioned that all parties are part of, or party to, much of the violence that occurs in the Gaza Strip, and yet the thing that's sort of um, left out are the stories of regular people who are caught there. Um, and as you mentioned in the book's introduction, being a journalist itself in Gaza is very difficult. Being a photojournalist or a journalist of any kind,
Mhm.
Hamas controls what you're able to document, and can confiscate your tools or detain you as a person. And on the other hand, as you write, quote, the Israeli army sees you as a potential threat that must be eliminated. And that has been the fate of many Palestinian journalists. I think news of that and the deaths of Palestinian journalists at the hands of Israeli armies starting more and more to reach Western eyes and ears. And there's a very harrowing photograph in here as well of a car that belonged to a journalist in Gaza. It's clearly marked TV. It was targeted by a missile during the time during which much of this book is documents is another so-called military operation by Israel called Protective Edge, also known as the Gazan War, in which over 2,000 civilians in Gaza were killed. Um, Many of the captions make reference to the lengths and processes you have to go to be allowed to be in that particular place in the particular time to get those photographs. So I think so much when you talk to photojournalists about the craft is sort of being at the right place at the right time, I guess,
Yes.
but also doing that and on your part takes a lot of negotiation and justification. And so I'm wondering if you can talk about that process with officials in Hamas, with other folks, and how maybe this grew, as you mentioned, this sort of nascent curiosity you had, which developed into this photographic practice, would seem to have take it one step further when you are starting to now have pretty risky conversations or putting yourself out there to be in a position to document things that the powers that be on either side might not want you to document. So I wonder if you could talk about how you navigated that process to document these really important photographs. And while you do, I think I'm going to queue up photographs of fishermen, which was something that I know was pretty difficult to do after fishing was allowed to expand again.
Right. I would say, like, first, when I was still like a mature journalist trying to figure out how exactly I want to pursue my journalistic career, or even just me being a photographer. Um, I didn't have to deal with Hamas officials or whatever, like, governmental entity. I was just in the ground having my camera that I bought, the first camera that I had, um, just wandering in Gaza's neighborhoods where there was always something to capture, and also there's always that reality of people of the neighborhood or people affiliated with one of the armed factions in Gaza going to stop you and just wonder about um, the reasons of your mission or what you exactly are doing here. And those people who have always had to deal with uh, have to have, like, they have to verify, like, who you are or the background of like the place of work you work for, all that. And I was always still, I didn't have that much like a journalist like reputation, like where they could go back to whoever, like governmental people, and verify who I am. This is the kind of reality that that I've always had to deal with, and I started facing first when I was wandering with my camera, and it's still actually the reality of today, where all those new generation of photographers have to deal with once they want to go to whatever parts of the strip, in the north or the south, where the armed factions are operating. They're going to always be like interrupted and questioned about the nature of their mission. And this is how I developed my understanding of how I need to operate. I had to go and register myself as a, like, officially journalist working for that place of work, and what exactly I'm trying to do, and establish those relations with those people inside the media office of Hamas government or the foreign affairs entity of inside the Ministry of Interior, where they always keep following up about your missions. You're going to always be stopped wherever you are, whatever part of the Gaza Strip you are, you're going to be always stopped and asked about what you are doing, and they're going to call back those governmental entities about to let them know of the nature of your mission that you are doing in this neighborhood. And then those, if you still have good relations and the reputation with those government officials, they will give you a free pass for those people who interrupted you to continue. Excuse me. And this is how, like, over the years, I've developed me trying to work on the ground, from just wandering with my camera to see all those realities that I'm going to face while I'm working on the ground. Beside this, like, there was always the risk of being targeted or by Israelis, working on all like during whatever like um, military escalations or regular protests or events that's taking place along the border of Gaza. I've seen with my eyes, while I have pictures of journalists that they got the bullet in their body while I heard it penetrating their body. Like this is an actual. I have a pictures of people, like literally. I was just standing, taking video or photo, and suddenly some of them fall on the ground, and then realize that he have been shot. This is someone who was doing nothing, and I've seen how it's just coincidence. You're lucky that that sniper who have thought that that journalist might be not what he exactly doing, not sure about what he exactly doing. Like it's just I think it was whatever that sniper feeling at that moment.
Yeah.
Just yeah, determine if you're going to receive that bullet or the person next to you. And it happened so many times for regular protesters next to me. I've always been so scared because of you hear the bullets coming very next to you. You hear it with the sound hitting someone next to you. So it happened in front of me with journalists or with regular protesters. This is like during regular times. We're not talking about military escalations, but during 2014 Israeli operation in Gaza, there are so many like I can't actually remember the number of journalists that have been killed or like deeply wounded, but I'm sure they are over 20 something. And there are like videos of them just with a tank shell falling on a journalist in a Shujaiya like neighborhood market. Journalist who was documenting people rushing, trying to buy whatever they can from that market that it's not actually open, it's just barely open to give people to retrieve them or to distribute the goods. And there are so many other incidents like this one where a tank shell falls or an Israeli like warplane missile fall on those journalists while they're working. This is how actually people are like journalists specifically are caught into such those dangerous like events, and you just don't expect when it's going to happen or how it's going to happen. But sadly, the reality is that we continue losing more and more journalists in Gaza. That's it.
And a lot of these journalists, as you're saying, are working independently. I presume they're not part. As you're saying, your work, the way you were able to get some of these photographs, and get through Hamas's attempt to control what was being documented was relationships, not much referring back to some kind of like I work for such and such entity that the government can vet.
Yes. So most of the journalists that have actually we've lost them or have been one that are working for local outlets, and actually like many of them are just they're not that much old in this field. They're like they've been working for a couple of years, for example, as some of the journalists that we lost in 2014.
Yeah.
Who were actually still like flourishing with their careers, starting and practicing their passion about the camera, and while they're not actually aware of the nature of working in those incidents. If I answered your question with this.
And yeah, I it just is a testament to your work as well that you I appreciate you for our viewers speaking so candidly and frankly about the risks that you face, you know, you talk at first about the risks that you face or the complications that you have just in dealing with Hamas. And then on top of that, simply to get out these, the thing I mean to underscore is to get out these photographs that can show the world what people in Gaza go through.
Yeah.
You have to go through these bureaucracies, which is annoying on the one hand. And then the other hand, you are, as you say, risking the luck of what a sniper chooses as their target, um, just for the price of trying to independently get this work out there. And I think it's important to stress. But
Last thing, excuse
yeah,
me.
go ahead.
Last thing I want to mention, like some of the other journalists who the nature of their work is just by communicating on their phones or on just writing posts on
Yeah,
Facebook or Twitter, and how they are being censored by the government of Gaza. There are so many incidents where people write posts or go on a like live video on Facebook, start talking about like whatever some of the behavior of the armed factions or whatever details that they think it's very important to talk about, like breaking that barrier and just writing a post or going live on Facebook. It's a huge thing to do. And after they do it, there are so many like cases where people disappear after like they had that like live event on
yeah,
their Facebook page. We hear they got arrested. Immediately, their friends who are or their neighbors who are affiliated with one of the armed factions would talk about, this guy is talking, giving trouble, or crossing the red lines, and
right.
those people immediately after that they get arrested. This is how like really hard for people to be able to speak what's in their mind.
Independently, yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
Um, one of the things that's striking about the book and that readers will notice, and I'll also make another reminder, folks, if you have questions, you can feel free to ask them in the Q&A, and I'll ask them at any time. But many of the photos, as I mentioned, are set during this military operation that Israel called Protective Edge, after a series of border incidents escalated into um, a conflict in which uh, Israel was bombing targets repeatedly, and the casualties in Gaza were quite high. And during this time, you took these photographs. You were also, as I mentioned in your bio, you were live streaming the offensive, and some of the devastation. And one of the things that struck me about this book personally, to connect it to myself, is that I'm almost certain I must have watched some of your videos or your streams during that time, as the new media that was coming out of, and the risks that you took to make independent journalism was rewarded by people like me thousands of miles away, viewing it and learning more about the real on the ground situation in the conflict than is maybe covered in the news. And that was really important to me, just as a person, to learn about the situation of people in Gaza was through that very brave act of documentation that was made available through something like streaming. But I'm also wondering about how the book you mentioned is a story of yourself, but it's also a story of this really pivotal and intense moment historically. And so when you left Gaza and came to the US in 2016, you had all these photos, and I'm wondering if you had something like this in mind, like a book, um, and how is it just sort of happenstance that 2014 and the events of that year comprised much of the photographs you had already taken, or how you came to think about this, these documents that you had as maybe being encompassed in the form of a physical book. I know it's weird to go from talking about severity of the situation there to talking about, you know, this piece, but I think it's important to think about how you've decided to present this really important document to the world in this way. And I'm curious to know about how you decided to compose it.
Um, like since my arrival to the US, I always felt that I need to talk about these photographs, and me finally being in person in the US will be able to take people to the dimensions beyond those pictures
Yeah.
that I could talk about as a citizens of Gaza. Um, Sadly, since I came to the US, I actually didn't have I never had any conversation about what I think of the conflict in Gaza with the people I've been working with. And so far, I didn't had any conversation with the people I've been working with about what we cover, how we need to do to tackle the issues that concerns the Palestinians in Gaza, because of how polarized each side of the conflict and how everyone is just really not interested to think how you personally think about it, because I'm sure where I'm standing, I understand exactly how I'm going to help in Gaza's case, for example. And this is where I felt my voice doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if you're more important there and whatever you through. And what matter most is how we think about it, how we are so sure that our stance is right, which is so wrong because of you're not really helping the people on the ground there. You're just fueling more. Each side will think that I know exactly that what I'm doing is right, and this is how you are just making it worse and worse for the people who lives under such cycles of violence. So I never had those conversations since I came to the US. And I'm so happy that Dave and my other like colleagues at Max Sweeney that really were not interested about anything except how I'm going to paint that picture for them, how they trusted me as a human. How you really want to tell us this story. And first I wasn't sure that I'm going that first I had the opportunity to publish those photographs as a photo book, but I
Mhm.
wasn't sure I wasn't sure that I want to do it in the form of a photo book, because those pictures are day in and day out coming out of Gaza, but they are helping to fuel everyone's narrative.
Yeah.
It's not actually telling the things that we need to tell. So I was trying. I got the opportunity to publish those photographs as a photo book, but I wanted to write a book. I I already had all my thinking process about religion, identity, what's missing, how we could actually improve people's lives, and instead of just keep pushing for a certain narrative. And so I wanted to write a book, but I don't have the experience. I'm not that much familiar with how for such like long process of writing and trying to just paint the entire picture that you want.
Mm.
So, and then I went back to maybe I could tell what I think with just signs and glimpses of my story with the photographs that I really believe how I'm exactly serving the helpless left population of Gaza. And this is how the book came to be.
Thank you. And I think this is a good opportunity to zero in on a specific photo that's really striking to me, and to have a chance for you to talk about maybe in more detail um, this kind of humanitarian aspect of this book, or the way that this book does, as you say, sort of transcend people beyond these specific narratives that they might want to have. And it's sort of in the center of the book, and I feel like it's kind of the centerpiece of the book. And I'll bring it up in a second. I can't read my question in full screen at the same time. I don't know. My technology capabilities are a bit limited, but so the picture I want to discuss is a photo of a farmer, Sharat al-Najjar, who's himself showing a picture of him on his phone of his face when he was shot with an exploding bullet from an IDF encounter. He was at the time unable to evacuate his village, just being invaded by the IDF because he was at the same time under house arrest by Hamas. So I wonder if you can talk about the story. I think this is a kind of a testimony that you talk about wanting to capture in your book that's maybe lost to audiences outside of the conflict and in the representations of this conflict. And I wonder if you can sort of, I'll share the photo and then you can talk about this particular photograph and this story and how it ties into, you said it before we went live about these are living narratives. I mean, these people are still in Gaza.
Right.
Here, I'm sorry. I'll bring up the photograph.
Take it time.
Okay, here it is.
If you don't mind, I'm gonna go read the caption.
Absolutely, please do.
Go. Yes. Okay. So on September 13th, 2014, 3:13 p.m., met Shahd al-Najjar, and I've talked to him about what he have witnessed and what he have been through. And my caption just captures a little bit of his story, that it really went for days. Shahd, after he got shot, I'm going to go back to, I'll read the caption and then go back.
Okay.
Shahda's story. So 44-year-old farmer Shahd al-Najjar shows a picture of his face from when he was shot in the jaw and arm with exploding bullets by an Israeli soldier. When the Israeli army invaded Khuza'a, a village in the southeastern Gaza Strip, they told Shahda to take his clothes off. The Israeli soldiers ordered Shahda's family members to come out of their home one by one. Shahda hadn't been able to evacuate Khuza'a before the Israeli invasion because he was under house arrest by Hamas militants who suspected him of being anti-Hamas. He said, if I hadn't been shot by Israeli soldiers, as Din al-Qassam soldiers, militants would have called me a spy and shot me in the middle of downtown. So Shahda, who is a farmer living on the eastern side of Khuza'a village, who have lived there most of his life, in his home that is located there, where he regularly goes to the farm next to in an area next to where he lives. He used to, as he told me, he used to visit relatives that are affiliated with the rival opposition to Hamas, which are Fatah. Who, when this is what maybe give Shahda the reputation that he's a Fathawi, someone who's affiliated with Fatah. Shahda told me because of his regular visits, like during the conflict, 2014 conflict, to his relatives' area, because some militants have suspected him that he was, I don't know, like giving information about their activities or where they are moving, what exactly they are doing. So he told me that Qassam members came to his house and told him with all those charges and suspicions against him. And that's during the war, during 2014 Operation Protective Edge. They came to his house amidst all the loss and amidst all the pain that the citizens of Gaza are enduring, they ordered him to put him under house arrest and told him to not leave his home. One of the, for example, the details that Shahda tells me, he was in his, while he was inside his home with the entire family, he heard Al-Qassam Brigade's members are being injured under his window. Like the clashes were so tense inside his neighborhood, back like between Qassam members and Israeli soldiers, and he heard some of them are being injured, and he offered to help or just give them water or something. And they shouted at him to stay in his home and to not leave while he was under house arrest. And after this, after Hamas soldiers withdrew from the neighborhood, Israeli tanks came in, and he's now stuck in his home. He's been stuck for almost a day before Israeli soldiers started to ask people to leave their homes and count people, how many people that are still here. When Shahda told me that the Israeli soldiers ordered him to leave his home, he was the first one to leave his house. He speaks fluent Hebrew because of he's been working in Israel before. So he started to talk to them with Hebrew before he leaves his home. And after he opened the door and just walked a few meters, he immediately got shot in his mouth by a sniper who was standing by his home, and he was shot in front of his family members. And then Shahda started to bleed and fall on the ground, and his family members couldn't rush to help him. They were so scared, and they went one by one after he was shot. And I can't remember exactly the details, but I remember he told me Israeli soldiers lined up his family while leaving him bleeding without getting him any medical treatment. Maybe after, I can't exactly remember the time, but it seems like an hour, like hours, or maybe an hour or something, till an Israeli unit started to provide Shahda with immediate medical treatment.
Right.
And then they moved him to another military site where other soldiers or doctors, I can't really remember, started to give him better medical treatment. And Shahda stayed there inside while his village being attacked, while so many lives was being lost inside his village. He was being treated by his injury inside. Once Israeli tanks go inside the village, they start to irrigate sand hills and make a small camp. So he said they moved him inside one of those camps, with surrounding tanks and soldiers, where for a few days he stayed there before they transport him inside Israel, and then they sent him back to Gaza, something like that. And really, Shahda's story just captures the tragedy. Before, it captures how much we could go against each other, we Palestinians against each other. It represents how when Hamas militants have pushed big part of the population in Gaza to the West Bank, those who were affiliated with Fatah, the PA, in 2007, after their takeover of Gaza, where we have lost hundreds of Palestinians just by conflict. They were throwing them from over like buildings, or just shoot them based on how they look like, if they are affiliated with Fatah or if they are bearded and looks like more Islamish, you know. It just captures all these realities, and how we're so against each other before we are like trying to solve the bigger picture with Israel. And today's reality for Shahda, he's living in Gaza, being shot by Israelis. He knows the reason that he was being shot was that he couldn't leave his home. His fellow Palestinians prevented him to leave his home. And his story cannot be told fully and the way it was, because of it's so much troubling, and it's so much going to give hard time for the person who telling the story, or maybe for Shahda himself. And what I'm attempting to do with here, like with Shahda story, is just to bring truth to power, to see the human impact, the reality that impacted all those citizens of Gaza, and how we need to just look over the differences and really just have more responsibility to how we treat each other before we're going to solve our bigger picture with Israel.
Thank you for expanding on Shahad's story and you know what went into that photograph. Like I said, I just think it does exactly that. It's a complicated, really complex narrative that is not easily told by having a sort of ready-made narrative to supply it, because it complicates all of them.
Right.
And I think that's really important for what works of photojournalism can do, and what's really powerful about this book is showing those nuanced and intense narratives, and also just showing the actual human beings behind them. I think the thing that's really beautiful about the book as well is how easily you're able to capture the humanity of the people you document, and center that as the first thing that you're capturing are just, you know, our fellow human beings.
Yes.
So I'm wondering if we have maybe time for a couple more questions here. If you're able to share, I know it's probably difficult. It's certainly very difficult to share the book with folks in Gaza at this point. But if before you left, or while you were still documenting and still taking pictures, if you were able to share any of these finished photographs with their subjects, and if you're able to stay in touch with some of the subjects themselves, and maybe how your relationship to some of the places and people you've documented has stuck around, or you know, how you're able to still stay communicated. I know you mentioned that it's also difficult for information to get out because of trying to sort of say make a post on Facebook or something like that is much more difficult. Connecting over the internet is much more difficult than it is for, say, me and my friends who've been separated by something as simple as the pandemic.
Right. Uh, like, unfortunately, I'm not able to stay in touch with many of the subjects of my photographs, just due to so many reasons related to how I think about generally the general conflict, or the realities of the subjects of my photographs, because of they're just too busy with to have a Facebook account, or
Yeah.
to have that online life, because
Yeah.
of they just living that simple life to be able to live day to day, support themselves, and have a decent life, or um, or just not seeing not seeing where their photographs could be published, or what impact could it have on the larger picture of the situation in Gaza. All these, I believe, all these just different reasons and realities that people live in there, or the reasons that I am here in the US and not able to share those photographs
Right.
or stay in contact. This is part of the sad reality of the book, that is just I had to go out there and maybe sacrifice not be able to come back to Gaza
Yeah.
to tell the things the way I believe in, and this is where I'm today. Although I spent so much time with many of them and many of the farmers along the border with Gaza, that we had a lot of time to curse the rulers of Gaza and enjoy a cup of tea while thinking, why are we getting this still? Why are we getting it wrong? How they've been live they've been living for decades along this border, and things are not moving better, but it's getting worse and worse. If I answered your question with this.
I no, I think you have. I mean, I was curious to know if maybe before they got to see some of the proofs or something like that, knowing that they might not be able to see the book. But I think you're no, that's a very clear answer, and it underscores again the how a book like this is able to be made involves you know some sadness in that respect, and um to me it was a reminder of its vitality too as well, because as you mentioned, these people are still living and working and hopefully in some senses flourishing in Gaza, and um it's up to us to see their images as composed in your book and collected in your book, and be reminded of that, and keep that in mind. um
The
I think we
most
have
important, sorry,
no,
the
go
most
ahead
important,
please.
and the most important for me, those causing such escalations of violence and those causing such tragedies, I hope they could get to see the book
Yeah.
and see the impact of their decisions, and how it actually didn't impact their families, but it impacted the rest of the population in Gaza. That's Today we have one of the highest numbers of unemployment in the world, one of like really the most disastrous situations that a population could face. I hope they could they can see in the book beyond whatever positions they have, see their fellow Palestinians and try to stand up for them.
Yes, thank you for that.
Yeah.
And I think maybe before we go, I'll just ask you about we'll leave with some towards the end of the book there's some really wonderful pictures of some night scenes, and obviously we've talked about there's the situation continues to be difficult, and the conflict persists even through different historical fluctuations that we're experiencing this year, and et cetera. But you also do such a marvelous job of documenting, everyday life. And as we were saying before we went live, that the people in Gaza are still able to flourish and they still have community. And that's really beautifully captured here. So I want to share those images. And then maybe my last question for you is, I don't know, just perhaps looking at these pictures, some of the things that you hope that audience can understand beyond conflicts that are evoked in these pictures of everyday life, and anything else you want to share before we go, and I'll go ahead
Oh,
and share these pictures.
sounds good.
So yeah, we have these pictures of here vendors selling sweet corn You mentioned, in some of these captions as well, that there's a lot of beachside that would make any city, economically prosperous under normal circumstances. But of course, Gaza is cut off from having those economic opportunities by blockades, by internal political strife, et cetera, and the economic problems that you mentioned. But there's also these really just wonderful pictures here of people watching a bike show, um, um, fishing. So yeah, if maybe if there's any story that you want to share from one of these photographs, again, something that people are, of course, and they're experiencing rolling blackouts, which are depicted here. But yeah, I don't know if there's maybe another story you want to share that that we haven't captured or that I haven't really addressed yet in my questions. That's important to think about as well, away from uh, narratives that still sort of reduce our thoughts about Gaza to conflict.
I would just generally describe those those just day-to-day daily photographs, how amazing people could just keep up with the beautiful sides of their life and try to have just little joy because of, at the end of the day, they just can't go back to sleep seeing everything dark. It's just people manage to enjoy the crumbs of life and
Mm-hmm.
whatever it's being offered for them. People have to forget and move forward, and there's no time to always just those who are always ready to enforce that reality and to remind Gazans of their like tragedy or
Right,
occupation or sad life. No,
right,
Gazans, they're going to always fight back and
right,
celebrate in the streets and in the weddings and in the parties they could have and the whatever little details they could enjoy in their day, even though those in power are still in power and they are managing to benefit and build up more and more for themselves and for their families. That is not the only joy and beauty about life. We could just enjoy the simple sit under the sun and just wonder about how unfair the world is while we are living this reality.
yeah,
I see myself in those pictures. I remember all my classmates, friends who I'm not sure where the reality of Gaza have led them today, but uh, I'm sure they are trying to keep up with this life and try to offer a wonderful, a kind, warm perspective for Gaza and for those who wants to visit and come to see Gaza to enjoy their company and to see some other nice things about life in Gaza, although it's not whatever the media wants to put out there.
right. Well, one of those such images of celebration graces the cover of the book as well, which I think is quite fitting, and
Yeah.
speaks to that resilience and joyfulness and celebration. So yeah, and folks can of course purchase the book from Literati Bookstore, and if they're watching later on YouTube, there's a link in the description below. But we've reached the top of the hour. Jehad al-Saftawi, thank you so much for joining me and speaking with me about this book and about your work, and through your story, telling the story of your city. And again, congratulations on all the success. And I'm so appreciative of getting the chance to speak with you about your work, and I'm excited to see your future photographs as well.
Thank you, John. Really, thank you for your excellent tackling to what's important in this book and for the life aspects that Palestinians in Gaza are living under today. Thanks for all you do, man. I
Thank
appreciate it.
you. Thank you for the photographs and for this book. It's truly, it's a beautiful work and congratulations on it. And thank you for doing it. And thanks for speaking to our community about it. And when all this pandemic stuff is over, be sure to come by the bookstore in Ann Arbor and we can meet in person. But until then, be safe and take care.
Yeah. Thank you so much.
Take care. Good night, all.
Take care.